I want you to imagine a world for a second.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So it's a world entirely defined by extreme wealth, like endless glittering parties flowing with bootleg champagne.
Right, the classic Roaring Twenties vibe.
Exactly. There's this constant pulse of jazz music in the background and just this pervasive sense that tomorrow simply does not matter. On the surface, it's a nonstop carnival.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds incredible on paper.
It does. But underneath all that sparkle, like beneath the perfectly tailored suits and the beaded floppy dresses, there is this deep, hollow emptiness.
A kind of toxic rot hiding right in plain sight.
Yes. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking you straight into the opening chapters of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby.
It's such a compelling era to explore. We're looking at the 1920s, the absolute zenith of the jazz age.
Right, but we're not just doing a historical timeline here.
No, not at all. We are looking at the specific psychology of the people who actually lived inside that glittering veneer and the massive, often tragic flaws they were desperately trying to hide.
Our mission today is to peel back that shiny exterior. We want to look at the engine underneath.
Exactly. To really explore the stark social divides, the deeply flawed characters, and, well, the toxic secrets that keep this whole society running.
And honestly, reading through these first two chapters again for this deep dive, I couldn't help but compare the post-war euphoria these characters are experiencing to, like, a highly curated modern-day social media feed.
Oh, that's interesting. Walk me through that connection. What are you seeing there?
Well, think about the mechanics of a social media feed. On the surface, the grid looks absolutely perfect.
Right. The stunning vacations, the flawless outfits.
Exactly. The couples look entirely obsessed with each other. The houses are immaculate. It's this illusion of effortless perfection.
But the reality is usually quite different.
Completely different. What's happening behind closed doors, behind the screen, it's messy. It's driven by intense insecurity, and sometimes it's incredibly dark. People are just staging their lives for an audience.
Which is exactly the dynamic Fitzgerald is setting up right from page 1.
Yeah.
And to understand how that discrepancy between the public image and the private reality actually functions, we have to start by analyzing the lens through which we are seeing this world.
Our narrator, Nick Carraway.
Right. Nick introduces himself with a very specific claim about his own psychology, which is rooted in advice his father gave him.
About remembering that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages he's had, right?
Exactly. And because he recognizes his own advantages, he essentially tells us that he is inclined to reserve all judgments about other people.
Okay, I really have to push back on Nick right out of the gate here.
Go for it.
Because he makes this grand claim about reserving judgment, but, I mean, he immediately reminds me of a very specific archetype.
Oh.
Nick is exactly like that one friend we all have. You know, the one who constantly walks around saying, I absolutely hate drama. I just avoid drama at all costs.
Oh, I know exactly the type.
Right. And yet, if you look closely, that friend is somehow standing at the exact dead center of every single dramatic event that unfolds.
It's a brilliant contradiction. Nick is establishing himself as the ultimate objective observer just to gain our trust.
He's playing us.
He is. He's essentially telling the reader, I am a safe vault. People confess their secrets to me because I don't judge.
But the reality of his internal monologue is entirely different.
Oh, completely.
He weaponizes that neutrality by playing the quiet, non-judgmental confidant. He tricks people into handing over their deepest secrets.
Right, it gives him this quiet, immense power over them.
And he is absolutely judging them the entire time, like in the very same breath where he claims to be tolerant. He complains that this habit has made him the victim of veteran bores.
Yeah, he dismisses the intimate revelations of young men as plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions.
Exactly. He is incredibly judgmental while simultaneously patting himself on the back for his superior tolerance. It's wild.
And Fitzgerald is deliberately highlighting that hypocrisy. He wants to show us that nobody in this world is truly an objective observer.
Nick even says he's exhausted by what he calls the riotous excursions into the human heart. He wants the world to be at moral attention forever.
But there's one structural exception to this rule. A single person who actually bypasses Nick's cynical filter.
J. Gatsby.
Yes, Gatsby.
Which is so strange, considering Nick admits Gatsby represents everything he supposedly has an unaffected scorn for. So, what is the mechanism there? Why does Gatsby get a pass?
Well, it comes down to what Nick describes as Gatsby's extraordinary gift for hope.
A gift for hope.
Yeah. Nick identifies this romantic readiness in Gatsby's
Mm.
that simply doesn't exist in anyone else in this cynical post-war society.
Wow. Okay.
And to understand why that hope is so rare, we actually have to look at the physical geography of wealth that Fitzgerald constructs here.
Right. The setting is super important.
It's extremely. So Nick moves to New York and rents this weather-beaten $80 a month cardboard bungalow on Long Island in a place called West Egg.
And he is squeezed right next to these colossal, absurd mansions.
Specifically Gatsby's mansion, which is literally a full-scale imitation of a French Hotel de Ville.
Which is just so over the top. And then, directly across the bay, you have East Egg, lined with these pristine white palaces.
Right.
So we have these two identical landmasses, but they represent a massive, deeply ingrained psychological divide.
Because the physical similarities of the eggs mask a brutal sociological barrier. West Egg functions as the quarantine zone for new money.
Ah, new money.
Yes. These are the people who have recently made their fortunes. The culture there is flashy, it's ostentatious, it's the imitation French mansion trying desperately to prove its legitimacy.
Trying too hard, basically.
Exactly. Whereas East Egg is old money, it's established wealth, generational privilege. The people in East Egg don't need to build imitation French mansions because their superiority is just assumed.
So it's really all about gatekeeping power. Having money isn't enough to get you into East Egg. It's about the pedigree of that money.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the people sitting at the very top of that gatekeeping hierarchy. Nick goes across the bay to have dinner with his cousin Daisy and her husband, Tom Buchanan.
And Tom Buchanan is a character whose physical presence is entirely designed to be overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
Nick notes that Tom was a national figure as a football star at Yale, but he essentially peaked at age 21.
Everything since then savors of an anticlimax.
Right.
The physical description of Tom is just so visceral, Nick literally calls it a cruel body.
A very specific, deliberate word choice by Fitzgerald.
Right. He's got this enormous power, filling his writing booth so tightly you can literally see the muscles shifting under his coat. He physically dominates the room.
He physically moves Nick around like a chess piece.
He really does. But what I find fascinating is how that physical intimidation masks this bizarre intellectual fragility.
Yes, and you see that fragility surface during dinner. Tom brings up this pseudo-scientific book he's been reading called The Rise of the Colored Empires.
Right.
Now, obviously, as we analyze this, we're not endorsing the political or social theories presented in that fictional book. But impartially reporting on the text, we have to look at how Fitzgerald deploys this moment to reveal Tom's internal mechanics.
Yeah, Tom insists the book is all scientific stuff and that it's proved, arguing that it's up to the dominant race to maintain control before they're, utterly submerged.
Exactly. And it begs the question, if he is sitting at the absolute pinnacle of society,
He has the old money, the mansion, the physical strength.
then why is he so consumed by paranoia?
That's the million-dollar question. Why is he so scared?
Because deep down, Tom knows his dominance is completely unearned. He peaked in college, his wealth was inherited, he hasn't actually built or achieved anything of substance.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. When your entire identity and social standing are based on arbitrary inherited traits rather than personal merit, you exist in a constant state of terror about being replaced.
So his obsession with this book highlights a deep-seated insecurity.
Yes. I needs external pseudoscientific validation to convince himself that he is inherently superior, because he secretly suspects that without his money, he is nothing.
That casts such a dark shadow over that entire dinner party, and it makes the contrast with his wife, Daisy, even more jarring.
The contrast is night and day.
If Tom is this heavy, grounded, cruel force, Daisy is introduced as entirely weightless. Like, Nick walks into this room where the curtains are blowing like pale flags, and Daisy is on a couch buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon.
Her white dress rippling.
Exactly. It's so cinematic.
And Fitzgerald uses that ethereal imagery to establish Daisy's primary survival mechanism, which is detachment. She literally floats above the reality of her own life.
And the tool she uses to pull others into her orbit is her voice. Nick calls it a singing compulsion.
It promises that she has done gay, exciting things and that more are coming.
But the illusion shatters almost immediately, doesn't it? The phone rings during dinner, the tension skyrockets, and we find out Tom has some woman in New York.
Yes. Tom isn't even really hiding it, and Daisy clearly knows.
Which leads to this moment on the porch that I really need you to break down for me.
Okay, let's look at it.
Daisy is talking about the day her daughter was born, She finds out it's a girl, she weeps, and then she says, "I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool."
It's a famously heartbreaking line.
I just can't wrap my head around Daisy here. She has all the money in the world. Why is her greatest hope for her daughter that she ends up stupid? That sounds like, well, terrible parenting.
It sounds horrifying until you really examine the sociological cage Daisy's living in.
Okay, a cage.
Yes. Daisy's wealth and her status in East Egg are entirely dependent on her marriage to Tom. In the 1920s, a woman of her social standing divorcing a man like Tom Buchanan would be social suicide.
So she's trapped.
She is trapped in a marriage with a cruel, chronically unfaithful man, and she possesses the intelligence to fully understand the tragedy of her situation.
Ah, so the intelligence is actually the problem. Awareness equals pain.
Precisely. Daisy is articulating a profound, cynical coping mechanism here. She believes that in their highly restrictive world, intelligence and awareness only guarantee suffering for a woman.
That makes total sense. If you understand the mechanics of the cage you're in, the cage becomes unbearable.
Exactly. Therefore, she concludes that willful ignorance, being a beautiful little fool, is the only viable strategy for a woman to find any semblance of happiness or peace. Her cynicism is basically her armor.
It's just devastating. She's essentially saying, I see the bars of the cage, and the only way to endure it is to convince yourself the cage doesn't exist.
Right.
And if East Egg is this airy, floating illusion of superiority built on willful ignorance, we have to ask, what is physically anchoring it all? Like, if these people produce nothing, who is paying the cost?
And Fitzgerald answers that question by dragging us abruptly out of the White Palaces and straight into the dirt.
We get a brutal narrative shift in Chapter 2. Tom takes Nick on a train toward the city and literally forces him off at an industrial stop halfway between West Egg and New York.
This is the Valley of Ashes.
The imagery here is practically apocalyptic. It's described as a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills, where the ashes take the form of houses.
It's a completely desolate reality.
Even the men who work there move dimly, already crumbling through the powdery air. It's so bleak.
The Valley of Ashes operates as an industrial sink. It is the literal and metaphorical dumping ground of the 1920s boom.
Right.
The relentless capitalism, the bootleg empires, the glittering parties of the eggs, all of that excessive consumption generates a byproduct.
So the wealth of the Buchanans is sustained by the exploited labor and the crushed spirits of the lower classes living in this valley.
Exactly. And overseeing this entire wasteland is one of the most unsettling symbols in literature, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg.
Just these gigantic blue, disembodied eyes. The retinas are a yard high, staring out from enormous yellow spectacles on an old billboard.
Nick notes that the oculist who put them there either sank into eternal blindness or just forgot them and moved away. But the eyes remain, brooding over the solemn dumping ground.
It functions like a forgotten divine surveillance camera. It's an advertisement that was abandoned by its creator, passively recording the moral decay of everything below it.
Passively watching, yes.
But it's completely powerless, or maybe just unwilling, to intervene. It suggests a society that has replaced any concept of a moral higher power with rampant commercialism. Like, God is just a faded billboard trying to sell you glasses.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it is under that indifferent commercial gaze that we meet the Wilsons.
George and Myrtle.
Right. George Wilson owns a failing garage in the valley. He's a spiritless, anemic man. He is so beaten down by his environment that he is literally covered in the white ash and dust. He almost blends right into the cement walls.
And when Tom arrives, George gets this desperate gleam of hope because Tom has been dangling the prospect of selling him a car.
Tom is actively manipulating George's economic desperation just to maintain access to his wife.
Which brings us to Myrtle Wilson. She is the complete opposite of George. She possesses this smoldering vitality.
She's very alive.
Yes. And she completely ignores her husband. She walks right through George as if he were a ghost, locks eyes with Tom, and covertly agrees to meet him in the city. And George is entirely oblivious.
Myrtle represents a desperate, clawing ambition for class mobility. She looks at Tom Buchanan and sees an escape velocity from the Valley of Ashes.
So Tom, Myrtle, and Nick head into New York City, and this is where the mechanics of illusion really start to accelerate.
The trip to the city is a masterclass in how people willingly deceive themselves. It starts right on the street when Myrtle demands to buy a dog.
Oh, the scene is so bizarre. She flags down a vendor and asks for a police dog. The guy pulls out this wriggling mutt, and even Tom, who is not exactly an expert, points out it is absolutely not a police dog.
Right, and the vendor immediately pivots, claims it's an Airedale, even though its paws are clearly the wrong color, and charges Tom $10.
It's a completely fake purebred, but Myrtle just strokes it and says, I think it's cute.
Because the purchase of the dog is a microcosm of the entire affair. Myrtle isn't buying a pet. She is acquiring a prop.
A prop.
Yeah, she is buying into the illusion of a domestic, affluent life with Tom. And that psychological shift goes into absolute overdrive when they arrive at the top-floor apartment Tom rents for her in the city.
Myrtle undergoes a complete physical transformation that alters her entire personality.
She changes out of her everyday dress into this elaborate, cream-colored chiffon afternoon dress.
And the moment the dress goes on, her neurochemistry seems to change. It's wild.
The clothing acts as psychological armor. The intense vitality she had in the garage morphs into an unbearable haughtiness.
Her laughter and her gestures become violently affected.
She begins playing the role of a wealthy East Egg socialite, literally complaining to the room about the lower orders and the shiftlessness of the ice delivery boy.
She actually says, these people, you have to keep after them all the time.
It's astounding.
She is standing in a rented apartment, having an affair with a married man who views her as totally disposable, and she is sneering at the working class as if she isn't married to a mechanic covered in ash.
It's a defensive distancing. By adopting the class markers and the prejudices of Tom's world, she's desperately attempting to convince herself that she belongs there.
And the apartment itself kind of mirrors this desperate pretense.
Oh, definitely. It's a small, claustrophobic living room stuffed with oversized tapestried furniture featuring scenes of ladies in the gardens of Versailles.
It's a room full of cheap fakes trying to project aristocratic grandeur.
And then the guests arrive to populate this fake room. Myrtle's sister Catherine, with her plucked eyebrows drawn back on at a rakish angle.
And the McKees from downstairs. Mr. McKee is a photographer whose art consists of these blurry, over-enlarged photos that basically look like nothing. Everyone is performing.
Everyone is pretending to be something they aren't.
But amidst all this drunken pretense, there is one massive lie that really underpins the entire gathering.
The lie that maintains the structural integrity of Tom and Myrtle's affair.
Exactly. Catherine sits next to Nick and whispers that neither Tom nor Myrtle can stand the person they're married to. She says they would get divorced and marry each other immediately, except for one problem.
She claims that Daisy is Catholic, and Catholics don't believe in divorce.
Now, Nick is Daisy's cousin. He knows for a fact Daisy is not Catholic. This is a complete fabrication. Walk me through the mechanism here. Why inject this specific lie into the ecosystem of the affair?
It reveals the cold-blooded, calculating nature of Tom Buchanan. Tom had absolutely zero intention of leaving Daisy.
None at all.
Daisy represents his pedigree, his old money anchor in East Egg. Myrtle is merely an ego boost, a temporary diversion who validates his dominance.
But if Tom tells Myrtle the truth, that she is a disposable novelty, he loses his power over her.
Exactly. So by inventing this fictional Catholicism, Tom creates an insurmountable external barrier.
He gets to play the tragic star-crossed lover.
Yes. He keeps Myrtle securely on the hook, allowing her to live in the fantasy that they will eventually be together, while entirely absolving himself of any responsibility to actually make that happen. It's highly manipulative.
And Myrtle swallows the lie whole because the alternative is facing reality. Later in the party, she admits why she married George in the first place.
Right, she thought he had breeding.
She says she thought he knew something about breeding, but realized she made a mistake when she found out he had to borrow the suit he wore to their wedding.
She believed George was her ticket out, and when he wasn't, she felt cheated.
Now, she is just projecting that same fantasy onto Tom. She is entirely complicit in her own deception because the truth, that she is just a plaything for a bored billionaire, is simply too devastating to accept.
Both of them are extracting something from the other to maintain their own illusions. Tom escapes the intellectual complexities of East Egg to be worshipped in New York. Myrtle gets to play the sophisticated aristocrat.
But it's a house of cards, built in a smoky, claustrophobic room, resting entirely on exploitation and self-deceit.
It really is.
So we've traced the anatomy of this society, from the manicured, exclusive lawns of East Egg down into the industrial sink of the Valley of Ashes, and up into the delusional, performative space of the New York apartment. And looking at all of this, it forces a mirror onto you, the listener, today.
Because the architecture of human self-deception hasn't really changed since the 1920s. We still have our own versions of the Valley of Ashes.
We do. Who is paying the invisible physical price for the glittering, perfectly curated lives we see displayed on our feeds? Whose labor is hidden away so the facade can remain pristine?
And on a more intimate level, how many of us operate like Nick Carraway?
Oh, that's a tough one. How often do we claim to be neutral, objective observers who hate drama while secretly maneuvering ourselves to consume the chaotic revelations of others from a safe distance?
Recognizing the illusions of others is always easier than interrogating our own.
We are all willing to believe certain convenient fictions if they help us survive our own cages. Which brings us back to one final lingering image from the end of chapter 1. Nick is back at his weather-beaten bungalow. He looks over toward Gatsby's colossal, empty mansion in the dark, and he sees a figure step outside.
The one man Nick exempts from his judgment. The man with the extraordinary gift for hope.
Gatsby isn't hosting a party. He is standing entirely alone in the darkness. Nick watches him stretch his arms out toward the dark water in this desperate, trembling way. And when Nick follows his gaze across the bay toward East Egg, he sees nothing but a single green light, minute and far away, glowing at the end of a dock.
A light that is entirely unreachable in the dark.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with this. Picture that trembling figure reaching into the void. What is the distant, perhaps unreachable green light that you find yourself stretching your own arms toward in the dark? And more importantly, what illusions are you willing to believe to get there?